Running your own business is awesome. It's the dream, as they say. But it's very stressful as well. Customers, they'll see the front end, the products, the signs, the slogans, the happy owner. But it's the back end of the business that really drives the ship. The inventory management, the sales conversions, order processing and shipping. The business behind the business is the key to business. And for millions of businesses around the world, that business behind the business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. They're home of the #1 checkout on the planet, which is why so many businesses work with them. And Shopify brings the heat with their secret weapon, Shop Pay, which boosts sales conversions by up to 50%. And that means way fewer carts are being abandoned to checkout and way more sales are going. If you want to grow your business, you better be ready to sell anywhere and everywhere your customers are. Scrolling social media, on your website, in your store, and everywhere in between. It's no secret. Businesses that want to grow with Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Heinz and Mattel use. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/RTG, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/RTG to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/RTG. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Remember the Game. It is my retro gaming podcast where every week a buddy of mine and I sit down and we geek out about the games we played back in the day. My name is Adam Blake. Thank you so much for listening to the show. And this week we are not doing any of that. There is no sitting down with a buddy of mine to geek out about the games we played back in the day because I'm dead. Or away on holidays or something. I don't know. Anyways, to buy me some time until I get back to this computer and start recording these again, I thought I'd give you one of our freebies out of our Patreon archives to buy myself a little bit of time and some downloads, of course. And a couple of months ago, I released our expansion pass episode about the Sony PlayStation. It was one we'd done a couple years ago where we just talked about the PlayStation, our favorite games, our memories, the accessories, that era, all that kind of stuff. Went over really well. Those are some of my favorite episodes to do. We've done a whole bunch of them over on Expansion Pass on our Patreon. We've dedicated them to many consoles. We'll do more. I'll probably do one about every console eventually. But this week I'm going to talk about the GOAT. One of my favorite systems of all time, probably the reason that I'm sitting here right now, the SNES. This was originally Expansion Pass 233. It went live on October 17th, 2024, and now it is free for everybody to listen to. And again, it's just going to be the same thing. Trip down memory lane, talking about our favorite memories, our favorite games, what the era was like, what it was like back then when Nickels had pictures of bumblebees on them. Really good time. I hope you all enjoy this episode. Thank you so much for listening to the show. Have no fear. We will be back next week. I'm not back until mid-June, but we've got 2 additional podcasts already locked and loaded in the bank. Episode 336 next week will be about Gears of War 2. Can't fucking wait for that. Well, I couldn't wait to record it. I hope you can't wait to listen to it. That game is awesome. And then on June 18th, we're talking Mega Man X2, the sequel to one of my absolute favorite games of all time on the very Super Nintendo we are about to talk about, all right? Thanks for listening. Again, leave us a good review if you liked it. Sign up for our Patreon if you want to, blah, blah, blah. You know how it works. Enjoy this episode. Have a great day. Enjoy your Switch 2s because they're coming out tomorrow. Hope you all enjoy them, and I'll talk to y'all when I get back. Cheers. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 233rd edition of Remember the Game Expansion Pass. It is one of our Patreon exclusive weekly podcasts here at Remember the Game Industries. My name is Adam Blake, and if you're hearing this, you're watching this, whatever the fuck, if somehow you're consuming this, you support us on the old Patreon box, and if that is the case, from the bottom of my my burned out heart, thank you for the support. I appreciate it. And I call it burned out, not because I'm tired, but because Thanksgiving left me with days of heartburn. And I don't think there's anything like, I feel like all the fat and like turkey and everything that's been left around my heart at this point has been burned off. It is Oh, heartburn is a horrible experience. Anyways, this week for episode 233, I thought we'd tackle something that we should have tackled about 4 years ago, and that is the SNES. If you don't know, we have done console retrospective episodes of Expansion Pass about the NES, the original Xbox, the PS1, the Game Boy, the Nintendo 64, the GameCube, Sega Dreamcast, the Wii U. There's probably a couple in there that I've forgotten, but we haven't tackled what I consider to be the GOAT of retro game consoles, and one of the GOATs of just game consoles, period. The Super Nintendo. I fucking love this thing. You all know I love this thing. Based on your comments, all of you fucking love this thing, and I'm just gonna fanboy out this week. We're gonna talk memories, thoughts, favorite games, and we're just gonna circle jerk all over the NES for an entire episode. And we'll dive into that in just a moment, because as you know, part of your Patreon perk is a peek past the podcast. So grab your Super Scope, give your friend the broken controller, and protect your copy of Earthbound with your life. And I'll let you know what's going on around here. First off, thank you so much, everybody, for all the positive feedback on the Bluey episode from last week. I know it was anticipated. I hope it lived up to all of your expectations. I really do think there was a sizable portion of the community that thought it was like a serious review, either because they skipped it because they were like, I don't give a fuck about Bluey, or a lot of the comments were people genuinely trying to defend it. Like, I think, and it's cool, but like there were a lot of people really coming to the defense of that fucking dog. So if you haven't listened to it yet, it's not a serious review. I go over the top and hack it up and just make fun of the game. And yeah, it seems to have hit the mark. So I'm glad. Thank you, everybody. And if people are asking, when's the next one of those? I will probably do more of those comedy reviews down the road, but they're kind of like the draft episodes of the show. I don't want to I hear you. Like, where's the next draft? People, I understand. I don't want to do them too often because, I want them to kind of remain special. As cheesy as that sounds, if I'm dropping a draft or a retro, like a kiddie game review every month, the novelty will wear off. So I want to keep them special. And B, they're a lot of fucking work. The draft, I got to get 4 people. Like, dude, there's times where we record Remember the Game about 90 minutes before it goes on the air. Before it hits the internet, to be on the air, because I'm a radio guy now, before it hits the internet, because it's just the way our schedule's lined up. And the draft is 5 people, myself and 4 guests, which takes even longer. So they're really tough to do. And we want to, and then for these comedy ones, they're just it's a lot of writing. Like, it probably took me 3 or 4 hours to write that Bluey review. Because you can't just like write down, well, then you play uppy keepy with the balloon or whatever. Like, I'm trying to put jokes in and shit, and They take a while. So I hear you. We will do more. Probably won't be another one this year, but we will do more of them. They'll just be spaced out. Another thing I get asked about a lot is, when are we doing the next gaming confessions, or the next gaming hot takes episode? I don't know. We will tackle one or the other at some point. Same thing. They're a lot of work for me. And I'm not trying to be lazy, but I don't mean work as in like the hours that go into them. It's very difficult. Like, I'm glad that people enjoy it, but for that 45 minutes of show, trying to come up with a funny way to react to every confession or every gaming hot take or whatever the fuck, it's not as easy as it sounds. And they really stress me out because I never know if they're going to be funny. And to be honest with you, if I'm putting my cards on the table, the reason we haven't done another Gamer Confessions episode is I personally wasn't happy with the last one at all. I thought just didn't live up to what I set as a standard for myself. And believe it or not, there are standards around here. So I hear everybody asking. We probably will do one at some point, but they're not really at the top of my list. I do have some game reviews coming up on Expansion Pass over the next few weeks. The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom is definitely going to get a review when I'm done it. And Silent Hill 2 Remake is definitely going to get a review when I'm done it. What I'm actually thinking is the next 2 episodes of Expansion Pass are on October 24th and then on Halloween. So what I might do is flip the Patreon pick and let you folks pick what we talk about next week. And that'll give me another 2 weeks to finish Silent Hill 2 Remake. And then I'll drop the Silent Hill 2 Remake on Halloween. And then I'll drop the Zelda review in early November whenever I get around to finishing it. So I think that's what I'm going to do. As far as other modern games go, I still want to go back and finish Dave the Diver. And I probably will review it whenever I get around to finishing that. Still chipping away at Cyberpunk. It unfortunately got put on the back burner when I started playing Mass Effect 3. And now I got to hop in and do that thing where I haven't been back to an open world game in months, and I need to remember where I was and how to play it. But if I finish it, I'll probably do a review of it at some point. I am picking up Super Mario Party. I don't remember what it's called now. The new Super Mario Party this week. So if there's enough on the meat on the bone there, I'll drop a review. And I'm waiting to see how it reviews But I am interested in Dragon Age. The only one I've ever played was Dragon Age Inquisition, and I fucking loved that game. So if I do get Dragon Age and I like it enough, I might do a review of it. And then I'm also playing NHL 25 right now, but I don't think I'm going to review that one. I haven't played an NHL in about 10 years. I'm not going to play it online. I just play offline franchise mode and a little Be a Pro by myself. And the Be a Pro is kind of shitty. I really don't know if I have enough to say about it for a review. I can't even, if you're going to ask me, is it worth picking up? Like, I honestly don't even know, because I mean, I will say, as someone that hasn't played in NHL in quite a long time, I am enjoying it for what it's worth, but I've seen a lot of people say it's basically NHL 24. So I don't that's what I mean. Like, I don't think I can do that review justice, but it's okay. I'll let you know when I've played a little more of it. I think that's it. Still trying to get the Toronto video done when I have time to work on it. Gonna try to have the 24-hour stuff up this week. And I think that's it. Let's talk Super Nintendo. That's why you're here, right? Oh, speaking of retro games, now that I'm done Batman on the NES, which I'm still practicing because I want to get good enough to do a Let's Play of it for YouTube. Next up is Streets of Rage 2, which I think I'm going to start playing in the coming days. So hopefully you can come by and check that out. All right, let's do it. Let's cue up some music. Oh, wait, no, I'm not going to cue up some music this time. Normally I play some music here, and God knows I have no shortage of Super Nintendo tunes to pick from. But what I actually want to do is play a commercial from the Super Nintendo starring a very young Paul Rudd, who still looks the exact same as he does in 2024. And this commercial was like 34 years ago. It's fucking wild. They're 33 or some shit. But I still vividly remember this commercial from my childhood. So I'm gonna take you back to the early 1990s, play an old commercial for the Super Nintendo with that voice that I fucking love, that Nintendo guy's voice. And then we will talk about not only a gaming console, but a gaming hero, my friends, in the SNES. Enjoy the commercial, enjoy the episode, enjoy your life. Here we go.
When you decide to step up to this kind of power, this kind of challenge, this kind of flying, crashing, feeling, when you decide to get serious, there's only one place to come: the games of Super Nintendo. No one else creates this kind of experience, because no one else creates these kinds of games. Now you're playing with power, superpower.
I know the guy's voice was a little quiet. I couldn't really, like, it's an old commercial. I couldn't really do anything to turn his voice up. But I do, that voice, like, I could hear him just talking about various games. And, oh, man, what an era. My precious Super Nintendo. Everyone knows I love this system. Anyone that's ever listened to this podcast knows what a hard-on I have for the SNES. So let me take you back, and I'll tell you about the beginning of my love story with that little gray and purple box. If you weren't around in the 1980s, and I gotta say, I know we have some younger listeners that, like, some of you, the Super Nintendo was your first system, or the Genesis era. Some of you, it was like the 64 and the PS1. I'm frankly a little shocked at how many of you grew up on the PS2 and the Xbox and the GameCube. That makes me feel old as fuck, because I was, like, in my 20s when those fucking systems were big. But for those of you that weren't around in the 80s, when the NES was really blowing up, I don't know if I can properly convey, and if you'll ever be able to fully comprehend just how big the NES and Nintendo were. And I know they're bigger now. They're making more money now. Gaming as a whole is much bigger now than it was in the 80s. But it was just like, it was new back then. It was coming off of the video game crash, and it took over our lives. If you were a kid growing up in the 80s, Nintendo was in your fucking veins, at least in North America. It was everywhere. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend checking out the Christmas movie, 8-Bit Christmas. It's really good. And it's all about this kid trying to get an NES. And it's shocking how accurate it is, taking us back to the 80s and the original Nintendo. So I played my NES. I don't remember when I got it. I was born in 83. I don't remember a time in my life where we did not have an NES. That thing was my life. I would watch the Mario cartoons. I'd begrudgingly watch the Legend of Zelda cartoons. I would draw Mario stuff. I would just read those manuals and take them to school and read them on, like, I'd fucking read them on the bus anywhere I could. I would draw stuff from the games. We would try to create the characters out of Lego. I used to design Nintendo board games where you'd be in, like, Mario and stuff and be playing, like, I was obsessed with the the NES. It was a religion for me. And it was like that with so many other kids back in the 1980s as well. Jake Carter said, as someone who grew up with the GBA, the SNES always translated so well with me. And honestly, it's my favorite console to go back to for games I haven't played. The jump from the NES to the SNES still blows my mind, and I wish I was around to personally experience that. We're going to get into that jump because we're totally talking about the Super Nintendo this week, not the NES. I will say, and I'll ask you, is there a bigger jump in console to console generation than the NES to the Super Nintendo? And I'll hear the argument. You could make the argument that the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis to the Nintendo 64 and the PS1. Sure, because they went from 2D to 3D and everything. I get that. But like in my opinion, the jump from the PS1 to the PS2 to the PS3 to the PS4 to the PS5, or insert whatever your favorite console, the equal generations there. For my money, I don't feel like there's been a jump that was as significant as the NES to the Super Nintendo. The NES, really, I love that thing. I was just playing it. I was just playing Batman. I love the NES, but it really comes across as them trying to be like, hey, let's see if we can make this video game thing work. And then the Super Nintendo and the Genesis felt like they were like, hey, we got the video game thing to work. Now let's fucking get good at it. And that was where they got fucking good at it. That jump was insane. Cody said, I remember my dad buying a Super Nintendo at a yard sale, but it didn't come with any games. After getting it home, he took off to the rental store to get a few. Meanwhile, my naive ass thought it was just a fancier Nintendo. I tried putting NES games in the top and none of them worked. What a waste of money, until he got home with Super Mario World. It was summer, no school, and my dad and I sat up till midnight till we beat the game together. Great memories. This system is still the GOAT. And you know what? That's funny too, because maybe parents did do this and I just was too young to remember. But like, remember when the Wii U came out and everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of people didn't realize that it was a different system from the Wii, and Wii U games wouldn't work on the Wii and stuff like that. I don't remember. Maybe it's because there was more advertising back then. It was more on television and in everybody's face. I don't remember a lot of people buying Super Nintendo games only to realize you had to go buy a new system. This won't work in the Nintendo. Like Nintendo really made it seem like this is not the NES anymore. This is the next system, and this one is bigger and better and more powerful and prettier and all that. I remember trying putting an NES game in my Super Nintendo to see if it would work. I think everybody did that. But I'm just curious if there was that confusion with the move up, because I don't remember it like we've seen. Like, if they were to call the Switch the Super Switch, there would be confusion and people being like, so is it just like maybe it's because there were no Pro consoles back then? Like, if they released a Super Switch, would people think like, oh, this is just like a Pro Switch game or system? I don't know, but that wasn't a problem with the Nintendo to the Super Nintendo. I don't know. The regular Nintendo, as we called it, or the original Nintendo to the Super Nintendo. I don't remember where I first saw the SNES. There was no internet back then, and I very rarely got a hold of gaming magazines as a kid. But I do remember that commercial I just played. Commercials were everywhere. It would get advertised in Archie Comics, and it was all over TV. Not to mention Video and Arcade Top 10. Shout out to that show and all my Canadian brothers and sisters that grew up watching that show. I still remember that Paul Rudd commercial, which I just played a couple minutes ago. And like, for the record, that voice isn't Paul Rudd, but I know all you're doing is listening to it. But look it up on YouTube. It really is a very young Paul Rudd playing like SimCity and F-Zero and A Link to the Past on like a fucking drive-in movie screen, and all these people are gathering around as lightning striking, and they're like, now you're playing with power, superpower. And it's true, and I wanted that system more than anything on this planet, and we didn't get one for at least a year after the Super Nintendo came out, excuse me. I don't know why, and I'm not dissing my parents here. I don't want to sound like an asshole. Like, I don't know if my parents were like, you and your brother already have Nintendo. We have Nintendo at home, which I know some people's parents did to them. I don't know if they were worried that we were playing too many video games, and they were like, if we buy them another Nintendo, they'll just go outside even less than they already do now, or if they just couldn't afford it. I honestly don't know why it took so long to get one, but I will say that like the anticipation of getting my hands on one, I think did make it a little bit more special, and I lost my little mind whenever I got a chance to get my hands on an SNES. My earliest Super Nintendo memories, my friend Corey had one. And I wasn't even that close of friends to Corey, but I do remember the kid. He had one, and he would always play F-Zero. And because that was a launch title, if you don't remember. That was a launch title for the SNES, was F-Zero. And I would always go over to his house, and we would play F-Zero, and that blew my mind. And what made me crazy was he had Super Mario World, because the SNES came packaged with Super Mario World back then. And I was like, can we play Mario? But he never wanted to play Mario. He wanted to play F-Zero. And I love F-Zero. That's why I chose that music to start this episode. I fucking love that game. You all know how much I love F-Zero. But it was only one player, so we had to take turns. And I was like, there was no NES F-Zero. Where the fuck? Let's play Mario. But I didn't matter. It was like, you literally could have told me that we won't even be able to turn the TV on. You can just come over and hold the Super Nintendo controller and we'll stare at a blank screen and we'll just visualize what we're doing. And I would have been there with bells on. I didn't care. I had to get my Super Nintendo fix. We've had some great partners over the years here at Remember the Game, but I don't know if any of them have hit home for me quite like Hometown Hero does. No pun intended. Don't start. It's a transparent, honest cannabis company that helps people and gives back to those that have served their country at the same time. I mean, come on. As soon as I read about these guys, I knew I wanted to work with them. Hometown Hero is a cannabis company out of Austin, Texas, and they were founded back in 2015 by a U.S. veteran. They have two goals: create premium hemp products that can help everyone, and to support veterans by donating a portion of those profits to organizations set up to take care of those who have served. Hometown Hero products are of the highest quality, and everything they offer is made right there in the U.S. of A. Gummies, caramels, chocolates, drink mix. There's something for everyone. And what's more, their hemp is grown locally in Texas, which is something they should and do take a lot of pride in. And they offer certificates of analysis for everything they sell because they want to be clear that their products are as advertised, both in terms of potency and ingredients. No contaminants, you get what you pay for. Just how they conduct business is enough to get my good eyes' attention. But when you circle back to the fact that the company was founded by a veteran and they put such heavy emphasis on supporting veterans, this isn't just lip service. I'm not reading a script I was given here. I'm proud to have Hometown Hero associated with Remember the Game. Reclaim your evening. Visit hometownhero.com and use code RTG to take 20% off your first purchase. That's hometownhero.com, code RTG for 20% off your first purchase. This is an ad by BetterHelp. A band once said, "Work sucks, I know." And I think most people agree with them. Workplace stress is now one of the top causes of declining mental health, with 61% of the global workforce experiencing higher than normal levels of stress from their jobs. And while walking away from your job might not be an option, taking a little time every day to focus on yourself and your mental health can make a huge difference. I know in the summer I try to get outside every day, get a little bit of sun, and just enjoy the outdoors. It really helps. At least until my allergies attack, and then it's ugly. It's important to take steps to combat work stress, and therapy can be a huge one. It's not just for overcoming trauma. Therapy can help you define work goals, set some work boundaries, develop coping skills. It's like a cheat code for life. And if you're thinking, man, I'm too busy for therapy, well, look into BetterHelp. They make therapy as convenient as possible. You can meet with one of their over 30,000 therapists online and on your schedule, just like over 5 million people around the world already have done. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Unwind from work with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/rememberthegame. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/rememberthegame. Quickly, speaking of the launch titles, if you don't remember, F-Zero was one of them, which it had some big... So it had 5 launch titles in North America. Gradius 3, I've never played. Pilot Wings, I obviously know of it, but I don't think I've ever played Pilot Wings. Not that I can remember. And then it had F-Zero, SimCity, and Super Mario World. And as a kid, we never got F-Zero. I used to rent it sometimes. We never got it. But we did get SimCity and then obviously Super Mario World. And I think even if you... I mean, I don't. Maybe Gradius 3 and Pilot Wings are great games. I don't know them to talk about them. But F-Zero, SimCity, and Super Mario World, it's so funny. Imagine today if what? No, never mind. I was gonna say, imagine today if a system launched with 3 games, but I know people will be like, Xbox still doesn't have 3 games. And I understand that. But imagine that's all it had, and there was no backwards compatibility. There was no indie games. There was no Fortnite and online games to play. That was it. It launched with 5 games, and I had played 3 of them. But I think SimCity, Super Mario World, and F-Zero is a pretty banging 1, 2, 3 launch lineup. And then within the first couple of years, they had your Zeldas, your Mario Karts, and you all know that. You know the heavy hitters. SP20 said, the SNES was my first system and the one that established my love of video games. I remember the first time I ever saw it, I was watching some random kid play Super Mario World at some holiday party that my parents dragged me to. My mind was blown by everything, the colors and the movement and the music, all of it. Even something as simple as the map screen music was instantly iconic and seared into my memory. That's my first real gaming memory, but I never actually played it until probably a year or two later when my parents got one for me and my brother to share, and I guess the rest was history. See, now that's a funny story because that's my other big... I have 3 early memories of the SNES. One is going to Corey's and playing F-Zero and begging this kid to play Super Mario World and being told Mario's dumb, we're playing F-Zero. And it was like, all right. And it's fine, but it's not Mario. Another one of my memories, though, was going to a party during the holidays. So Super Mario World was the big one. That was the one I wanted to play. That was the one so many people wanted to play. I would play Mario Brothers 3 on my NES over and over and over, and to the point where I was almost like pretending it was Super Mario World because I wanted to play Super Mario World so bad. And I vividly remember, I don't know if it was a Christmas party, but I vividly remember my parents taking my brother and I to a friend of theirs house for a party, and they had rented an SNES, and I'll never forget it. It was in that big black box that like Blockbuster and them used to have when you'd rent a system. It had the big black fucking Secret Service case. And I remember getting over there and they opened it and showed it to me and my brother and the other kids, and it was a Super Nintendo, and they hooked it up upstairs and we sat up there and we had all the snacks you could eat and all this like pop and everything. Pop is what we call soda here in Canada because people have asked what pop is. And we would just sit up there and we played Super Mario World all night long. And it was one of the best nights of my young life. We all remember being a kid and being allowed to stay up and being like, oh yeah, there's not really a bedtime tonight. We're having a party. Just stay out of the way and be good. But like to be able to stay up all night playing Super Mario World with these kids, it was I'll never forget. It was one of the happiest nights of my life as a child. It was I was just stricken with grief when we had to leave that party. And then the third one was sometimes when I would get off the bus coming home from school, I would have to stay at our friend's house. My brother and I had a friend named Royanna when we were little, and her dad, I don't know why he wasn't at work, but he would be at home, and he would live right by our bus stop. And so sometimes my mom and dad weren't home when we got off the bus, I had to hang out at Royanna's house. Oh my God. Fuck me, dude. Okay, so I remember going there, and they had a Super Nintendo, and they had Super Mario Kart, and I always wanted to play Super Mario Kart, but I remember my mom giving me shit one time when we were there, and I kept bugging them to let me play Mario Kart, and my mom was like, don't be rude. Don't, just stop. And so I never wanted to ask. And I remember sitting there one time after school, and her dad was watching like Much Music up here in Canada or something, some music channel, because Michael Jackson's Thriller video was on. And to this day, when I see that Thriller video, I think of Super Mario Kart because he was watching this video, and everyone knows that video is like fucking 8 minutes long or something. That video goes forever. And I was watching it, and he was like, when this is over, you can go ahead and use the Super Nintendo. And that video just kept fucking going and going and going. And I was like, end the video and get to Mario Kart. And so finally the video ended, and I got to play like 2 races, and then my mom showed up. And I was so mad that video had taken so long. Fuck you, Michael Jackson. I mean, your music is great, but I mean, fuck you kind of anyways. But especially fuck you because you cost me my chance to play Super Mario Kart. I remember that, man. Fuck me. Huge Ass wrote in and said, Super Nintendo is the GOAT. Perfected 2D gaming and so many franchises. Possibly one of my first memories is my brother, same age as you, Adam, and his name is also Adam, bringing home an SNES with Donkey Kong Country with the biggest grin on his face. Then the memories of staying up late watching my dad beating it and getting it 101%. So many more games that I still need to replay today. Castlevania 4, Donkey Kong Country Trilogy, Super Mario World, Metroid, Adventure Island, Street Fighter, F-Zero, etc. Good times. Yeah. Oh, man. We're going to get into the games in a minute because I feel like I will never get tired of talking about Super Nintendo games. But at this point in the story, I don't have a Super Nintendo. We did finally get one. We got it for Christmas. It was the most untouchable Christmas. To this day, it's the single happiest Christmas memory I have is opening my Super Nintendo. At least as a kid. As an adult, like the whole family thing is fine. But as a kid, it was a Super Nintendo. And you know what? I couldn't remember what year it was, but I'm almost positive it was 1992 because the Super Nintendo launched in 91. And I remember being at Royana's playing Mario Kart, and we didn't have one yet. And Mario Kart came out in the summer of 92. So I bet you it was the Christmas of 1992. We got our hands on our Super Nintendo. So little Adam was 9 years old. Josh was 6. And I remember my brother opening Super Mario Kart before we had opened the SNES, and my mom being like, you weren't, like she was like, she was like, you weren't supposed to open that one yet. So he had found Super Mario Kart, so we knew there was a Super Nintendo in there somewhere, and then we just started tearing through the pile, looking for whatever box might be the Super Nintendo, and I still remember opening it, and then like not wanting to open the rest of my gifts. I didn't care. And then you'd open them and be like, oh, cool, nice, an action figure, I don't give a fuck. Oh, wow, pajamas, Battle Trolls. Remember Battle Trolls? Oh, wow. And then I was like, let's get back to fucking the Super Nintendo, hook it up. And that was all we did for the rest of that Christmas break. We played Super Mario World and Super Mario Kart. And we had so many fights. But there were so many good times, man. My God. It was like the NES on steroids. And I know a lot of you that grew up in this area listening to this can relate to exactly what I'm saying. Super Mario World blew my fucking mind. That's why to this day, as much as I think Mario 3 is a masterpiece of a video game, I'm always going to side with Super Mario World because I just think it's Mario 3 on steroids. Better map, better levels, better graphics, better sound, better items, Yoshi, the better everything. Better boss fights, every single thing Super Mario World does is just a little bit better than Super Mario World 3, which is still a masterpiece. That game blew my fucking mind, man. F-Zero and Super Mario Kart. Super Mario Kart, we were comparing Super Mario Kart to like RC Pro-Am and Excitebike, which were the two big racing games we had on the NES. And listen, all due respect to RC Pro-Am and Excitebike, they're not Super Mario Kart. It was so wild seeing 8 characters on the screen at once, all ripping around, seeing these weird kind of 3D versions of like Bowser. It turns out they were 2D flat paper versions of them in 3D-ish worlds. But I remember seeing Bowser like that and just thinking it was so cool. And it just, night and day, that level up was just insane. I used to draw the map, the Super Mario World overworld map by memory. And I would just make people look at it. I remember just playing that game and going to my one file because we had a file that we shared, and then my brother had a file and I had a file. And I would go into my file and just scroll around that map because remember you could hold the trigger buttons and just explore that map. And I would make my mom or dad just sit there as I told them about the different areas of the map. And I could tell that my dad was like, you couldn't pay me less. Or you couldn't pay me enough to care about this. Like, I could not give less of a fuck if you fucking paid me. But I would make him just look at that map over and over again. That fucking giant bush cactus thing that would get hurt when you beat Ludwig, and then the Band-Aid would end up on his head. And I'd be like, that thing's got a Band-Aid on its head. And, oh, my God. So many good times. I remember my parents got a new TV, and they moved the old one, which was one of those ones in, like, the big wooden boxes. They moved that TV down to our basement. And my brother and I would sit on like concrete on pillows in this basement. And that was where we would play our Super Nintendo because we played it so much that they never got the living room TV. So they would send us down to the basement. And it was just, it was magnificent. And I know there's a lot of great games and we're going to get into them. But I remember we used to get a ton of games for it that were like the duds. And I don't mean to be like ungrateful for my gifts or anything. But what I assume happened was my mom would go to like the discount bins at like Zellers or the Canics on the base or whatever the fuck, and would just buy like the games that were in there that were like $10 or $20 because we had so many. We had like fucking Claymates, good game. It's on SNES Online, good platformer. Claymates, Dennis the Menace, Batman Forever, Pieces, which is a really good jigsaw puzzle game. I love that game. NHL Stanley Cup, Brett Hall Hockey 95. I would ask for NHL 95 or NHL 96 all the time. And I got NHL Stanley Cup and Brett Hall Hockey 95 instead, which both sucked. And I assume the reason I got those was because they were cheaper than like EA's NHL 95. Super Soccer Champ was this horrible soccer game we would play. We got Mario is missing. Ooh, fuck. Like my mom I think she would just raid the like discount bin and just grab whatever was in there and bring it home, and we would get those like for Christmas. But it was this was still the era where it was like, hey, I have a new game. I really don't give a fuck if it sucks or not, you know? And fortunately, to balance out the bad ones, we had a ton of good games as well. JD Roberts said, "Oh man, the Super Nintendo is one system I'll never not own. From the RPG catalog to Ninja Turtles, Super Castlevania, Final Fight, Link to the Past, and many other gems. In fact, I have one in my living room right now. I'm looking at my Super Nintendo right now on my shelf. God, it's beautiful. Those two purple buttons look so good on the gray. It's starting to go yellow. I have one of those ones that's starting to go pea colored, but I don't care." Some of the good games. I remember getting Donkey Kong Country, and they did a great job of advertising Donkey Kong Country on TV. And like, I had grown up playing Donkey Kong on my NES, but I didn't really have any other like attachment to the franchise. I fucking hated Donkey Kong Jr. in Super Mario Kart. I could never play as the heavyweights in Super Mario Kart. If you were good, little hack, if you're good at Super Mario Kart with Bowser or Donkey Kong, you're fucking untouchable because their top speed is so good. But I was not that good, and I could never win with those guys, and his stupid banana peels and his stupid face, and I always hated them. But I remember getting Donkey Kong Country, and that game blew my fucking mind. And I thought, like, it was the first time I remember just thinking graphically, like, wow. And Donkey Kong Country, I mean, it's one of the greatest platformers of all time. We all know that, right? Link to the Past, one of the masterpieces. That was my first Zelda game. I played a little bit of Zelda 2. If I went to like someone else's house, someone I knew owned it, because I would go to their house and we would like fire it up. And you all know, right? You play Zelda 2, and if you'd never played that game before and you were like 8 years old, you'd play it for like half an hour and not get anywhere, and it was just fun to be playing Nintendo. But Link to the Past was the first like the Zelda game that I owned that I played, and I used to go to the library near my house, and they had a guidebook about The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, and I would take that book out and just read it front to back to front, over and over. At one point, I don't know everything in that game anymore. It's been a while, but I knew that game like the back of my hand. At one point, it came with that little. If you owned it back in the day, you'll remember it came with that little, like, it was like a little secrets book. It was like a little black, like, pamphlet book, and you could open it and it had like a few tips and tricks in it. And I just thought that was so cool. And oh man, just looking at that overworld and seeing that giant area and being like, I could go explore all this. I need to find these 3 amulets. Are you fucking kidding me? Link to the Past, still my favorite Zelda. One of the greatest video games of all time. That one was a huge part of my childhood. Super Mario Kart, I already mentioned. Our big thing with Super Mario Kart was we would do battle mode. And you could only do 2-player. For you youngins back then, it was only 2 players. But we would do battle mode. You go to like a sleepover, and all it would be is the winner would stay on, and the loser would pass the controller off. And we would play battle mode all fucking night, man. Good times. Not to mention, that was the first game where I became obsessed with like getting all the first places. And back on Super Mario Kart, you didn't need to get first place in every race to get the gold trophy. You just needed to finish first place in the standings to get the gold trophy. And if you tied at the end of the last race, you would get first place. And I remember like doing the fucking math and trying to figure out like, okay, 1 race left, it's Rainbow Road, and all I need to do is finish at least 1 spot within Koopa Troopa. And then when I would lose, that was some of my first angry Adam memories, and my mom taking the controller away. We're trying 100% Super Mario Kart. Fuck. Because it was so cheap. It was so cheap. Fuck you. That was such bullshit, that fucking game. Fuck you. High Plains Drifter said, the Super Nintendo is my NES, or is my, I hate puns. The Super Nintendo is my nostalgia bank by far. Late night staying up, me and my cousins and my friends doing Mario Kart tournament bracket boards by hand and passing around the handmade trophy. The library is the GOAT. It's the Duff Beer of systems, not to mention the 2 greatest games ever, Link to the Past and Super Mario World. Man, I never thought to do like a Mario Kart tournament, like drawing a bracket, but that would have been fucking awesome. Yoshi's Island is one that stands out to me. I vividly remember that. I meant to grab the audio for that episode. I forgot that commercial. Does anyone else remember? I think we talked about it on the episodes about it, Remember the Game, but does anyone else remember the commercial for Yoshi's Island where there's this guy and he's just eating and eating? And what they're showing is like Yoshi just eating and eating, and then it keeps going to this guy who's getting like fatter and fatter as he eats and he eats. And then eventually he like explodes, and then just like stuff goes everywhere. It was just disgusting. I remember my mom hated that commercial because she thought it was gross. But then we finally convinced her to get us the game because it was Yoshi. And while I was a little bit disappointed in Super Mario World 2, just playing Yoshi, it's still a phenomenal platformer that I used to play like crazy as a kid. I've still never 100%ed that game. Some of those extra levels are fucking tough. I probably could if I put time into it, but tough fucking game. SimCity. We got SimCity shortly after the Super Nintendo came out. It was a launch game. My brother loves it now, but he didn't love it as a kid. He was too young. He thought it was boring. I played the fuck out of SimCity as a lad. But what I would do sometimes is I would run out of money. Like, you'd get your taxes in December, and then I'd be out of money by like the second week of January. And then I would just like walk away, or I'd play Game Boy, or I'd go read or something, and just let the game play itself out and wait until the end of the year where I'd have enough money to build like 3 new things, and I'd walk away again. Good times. Super Punch-Out. I've talked about it on this game. One of those games where I will blatantly fondle my own balls and say like that was the first. I would say Super Punch-Out was the first game that I mastered. I was a master of that game as a kid. Keep in mind, I was pre-YouTube. There was no internet to look up the strategies to beat all the boxers or anything. There were 16 opponents in Super Punch-Out, and it kept track of the time you had to beat all of them. And I had a file in that game where I beat all 16 of them in under a minute. I was very proud of that. And I had a record of like 255-0. And that was where the game maxed out. I would just play that game on repeat over and over and over again. I think that's where I started to fall in love with like puzzle games, because Punch-Out, in a way, they are puzzle games. And I think I also loved it because Soda Popinski wasn't in it. That might have been part of it too. But I was obsessed with Punch-Out, Super Punch-Out. Earthbound. Oh my God. So my friend Rob was a huge RPG nerd, and he introduced me to Final Fantasy II. He owned that game, which some of you may know is Final Fantasy IV. And I would go over to his house, and I wouldn't even play. I would just watch him play Final Fantasy II for hours. And I was captivated by this game. And then finally I convinced him to lend it to me. And I beat Final Fantasy II. It was my first RPG. It was Final Fantasy II on the Super Nintendo. And every day I would write down my stats, who was in my party, their HP, their magic points, what spells they had. Every day I would write them down and bring them to school and show them to Robbie and be like, "This is where my guys are now," and everything. And then I remember him telling me about Earthbound. And I just thought it was like the craziest idea for a game, that he was like, it's like Final Fantasy, but they're like a kid with a backwards hat and a baseball, or like a cap and a baseball bat and frying pans. And I was like, what? And I wanted that game for Christmas so bad. And I honestly wonder, if I had never met Robbie, would I be the Earthbound fan I am today? And I don't think I would be. Like, he was the one that told me about that game, because so many people missed out on it. That's why it's so expensive now. He was the one that got me interested in Earthbound. And I wanted it for Christmas so bad. And I remember finding it in my mom's closet, the big box, before Christmas. And she caught me. And she was so angry. Because my brother was... I know some of you listening with kids in the car, so I'm going to just... my brother really loved Santa. Like, I mean, we all love Santa, but my brother loved Santa. Whereas I was old enough where I was kind of like, Santa's fine, but whatever, you know. Yeah. And so anyway, she was like, if you make it so he doesn't love Santa, I'm taking all your presents back. You're never getting anything for Christmas ever again. And I wanted that copy of Earthbound so bad, I shut the fuck up, and I got it. And I used to play that game obsessively, and I would just read that player's guide. I would take it to school, and we would smell the stinky fart stickers in it, and I would just read that player's guide to death. God, I wish I still had my copy of Earthbound. So dumb. Professor Monkey for a Head said, nothing will ever beat the feeling of staring at a wall of Super Nintendo games at the rental store on a Friday night, only to take it home, pop it in the system, and hear the satisfying click of the power button. Dude, not to cut into your comment, but yes, the NES's power button was just that, like, it was nothing. It was like that little click when it went in. That Super Nintendo power button, when you would put like all 4 of your fingers into the little groove of the power button, and you would push it up, and it would just like, and it was off to the races. And it was like the best feeling in the world. Professor Monkey for a Head continues, shout out to Virtual Bart, who filled the gap when all the other games were gone and we were left with the shitty leftovers. So speaking of renting games on the Super Nintendo, we only rented Virtual Bart once. Even as a kid, I was like, this sucks. But we did rent Bart's Nightmare enough that my mom eventually bought it for us. We used to play that game obsessively. Mega Man X was my go-to rental game. Every time we'd go to rent a Super Nintendo game, I was looking for Mega Man X. And if I didn't get it, then I'd go find something else. And my other go-tos were like Battletoads and Battlemaniacs was a good one. NHL 96. Was it 96? It was the one that had Beezer on the front, John Van Beesbrook. I'm pretty sure it was NHL 96. Shout out to John Van Beesbrook. Yeah, it would have been 96. Yeah. Oh man, good times. I played the fuck out of that game. You know what game so those are my go-to rentals were Mega Man X, Battletoads and Battlemaniacs, NHL 96, or once in a while, maybe it was 97. Fuck, now I know nobody is going to care other than me, but now I need to see if it was 96 or 97. It was the one with Van Beesbrook on the cover. I would rent that game for a weekend, and I would play almost an entire season in a weekend, because I would just play it so obsessively. NHL 96 or NHL 97? It was NHL 97 was the one. Yeah, that makes sense because the Panthers went to the finals in 96 and lost to Colorado. So yeah, it was NHL 97 was the one that I would rent all the time because the bees are on the front. Oh man, I love goalies. So I'd rent that a lot. And then sometimes it was Turtles in Time, but it was never there. Like we always wanted to rent Ninja Turtles in Time, but it was never there. And you know what, my brother, he would always rent fucking Side Pocket. Did any of you? It's on Super Nintendo Online, I believe. It's just like a pool game. It's just like a top-down billiards game. And my brother would rent Side Pocket. And it was, I would make fun of him. It's not even like it's a bad game, but I would make fun of him so much because he'd be like, dude, I have Mega Man X. Look at this badass robot fighting these other badass robots with lasers and everything. And he'd be like, full ball in the corner pocket, and I'll take a martini, please. And I'd be like, fuck, you're lame. And then when he wasn't around, I would play Side Pocket because it was pretty fun. That was his big rental game, fucking Side Pocket. Or we would rent this bowling game. From when we moved to Cold Lake, we would always go and rent this bowling game from Leo's Video Max. Fuck, what was it called? Was it Super Bowling? Is that what it? Yes, it is. Because I was like, there's a chicken on the cover. And then look it up if you haven't seen it. Super Bowling for the SNES. And there was a chicken on the cover, and the chicken was doing commentary or a rooster or something. I got to get myself a copy of that game. My brother would always rent Side Pocket or Super Bowling, and I would always make fun of him for renting these lame games when I was getting Ninja Turtles and fucking Mega Man X. But then I would always play Side Pocket or Super Bowling. Ah, fuck me. Good times. We had Mortal Kombat 2. Still the only fighting game that I've ever owned, I think, outside of like Smash Brothers and wrestling. I would play Mortal. I would play Mortal. I don't know why, and I don't know why. I mean, maybe because it was all over like the magazines and stuff. So maybe I asked my parents. I can't imagine why else they would have bought me Mortal Kombat 2. But I used to play Mortal Kombat 2 quite a bit, and I would always be. It was either Melina or Katana, whichever one wore purple. That was my main. And I was not very good. Not very good at all, but I played a lot of Mortal Kombat 2. And then I would rent Killer Instinct because I thought it looked so awesome, even though I was really bad at it. Killer Instinct was a fucking cool looking game. Oh, man. Good times. There's so many games. We could talk about games forever. Navigante said the SNES was amazing. As an 80s kid, grateful but frustrated by NES tough games that were ultimately unreliable. You get that blinking screen constantly. And the SNES was an upgrade in every way. Link to the Past is still my favorite console game of all time. Great system. Too many hits to list. Looking forward to the episode. Dude, you brought up a great point. That was another thing. The NES by the Super Nintendo's, like by the middle of the SNES's life, NESs were doing that thing where it was blowing in the cartridge, holding reset, smacking the top, trying to get the game to work. Super Nintendo was insane because you'd put your cartridge in and then ka-chunk, push that button up and it would just work practically every time. It was insane. That was life-changing. Just knowing your game would work. Remember those days when you'd buy a game and it just worked? Fucking developers today. Anyway, we can talk about games forever. There's other things to talk about with the Super Nintendo. That controller, buddy, that controller is such a... Like, I'm literally, if you're watching the stream, I'm holding my NES controller right now, and I will never not love playing games with an NES controller. And I know the corners are sharp enough that when you throw it at your brother, it cuts his head open, and you could whip this thing into the concrete, and it would never break. A, B, select, start, and a D-pad. It was everything it needed to be. But then you got your hands on that Super Nintendo controller, and it was like a facelift in every way. It felt so nice in your hands. They smoothed out the edges. So now you could hit your brother with it, and it usually wouldn't draw blood. It was a blunt, or it wasn't as blunt. It was like a sack full of oranges instead of a fucking table, I don't know, something fucking sharper. So the corners were nicer. It had 4 face buttons. It had X and Y. I never understood why it wasn't C and D, but it had X and Y, and 2 of them had the grooves, and 2 of them had the fat belly button, the outies. And they felt so different, and it was so rad having 4 buttons instead of 2. And then, of course, the shoulder buttons. Can you imagine console gaming today without shoulder buttons? I mean, now we have 4. You have the shoulders and the triggers. But back then, just having those 2, And it was so weird because instinctively, it was just like it was programmed into your brain. Your fingers just went to the top. Your 2 index fingers went over those. You're like, I know they're there. I need these buttons. And they didn't even do anything. Like in Super Mario World, all they did was like pan the camera forward. But it was just cool that you had them. 6, they tripled the buttons. Fucking wow. I love the Super Nintendo controller. And remember the Super Scope? Oh, man. We had one. And I think I've told this story before. We would mostly use it outside just as like a bazooka. Like when we'd be outside playing, it would just be a weapon. We would just use it like playing guns or whatever the fuck. But if I remember correctly, my mom, we got Yoshi's Safari for Christmas, which was the Super Scope game where you rode on Yoshi's back. And it was kind of like an F-Zero map, but you would ride on Yoshi's back and shoot enemies with the Super Scope. And if I remember correctly, we got that for Christmas, but didn't have a Super Scope. But my mom didn't realize you needed the gun. And that was why we actually got a Super Scope. And it came with Super Scope 6, which was like these 6 weird games. And I honestly can't remember what other games used the Super Scope? Was that it? Like the Super Scope was an abomination. It was like a really cool looking gun. But it just didn't fucking do anything. Oh my God, look at all these things. I've never even heard of half of these games. Super Scope 6, Battle Clash, Yoshi Safari, Tin Star, Operation Thunderbolt, Max Combat, X Zone, Bazooka, Blitzkrieg, The Hunt for Red October, Terminator 2, Lamborghini. What would you need that in Lamborghini? American Challenge, Super Soccer, and Mario Paint. I don't remember using it as Mario Paint either. We played Super Scope 6 a little bit. We played Yoshi Safari sometimes because it looked cool, but we would mostly just take it outside and use it as a gun and play with it. There was the mouse, which we only ever used in Mario Paint. Now I know it would have worked in Jurassic Park, although not well, but we used it in Mario Paint was a good time. Mario Paint that was a fun little thing back before, we had a family computer, but my brother and I weren't allowed to play with it very much. So we would play with Mario Paint instead. That was our computer. Trying to remember if there's any other peripherals. Oh my God, buddy. Of course there's another peripheral. There's actually one that we probably should have done an episode of Remember the Game about some time ago. The Super Game Boy. My God, the Super Game Boy. You could take your Game Boy games and play them on your TV via your Super Nintendo. We had one of those. And if you're thinking, that doesn't sound that impressive, that's me smacking you through the microphone. It was very, very impressive. And yes, some of them looked like shit on the TV because they looked like shit on the Game Boy screen. But the Game Boy screen was like an inch by an inch and it wasn't colored. Putting them up on a big TV, yes, some of them did look like shit. But you know what didn't look like shit on your TV? Pokemon or The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. Those were the two we used. I played Pokemon Blue so much on my Super Game Boy. And if I remember correctly, it had like a border around it. It was one of the games that came with like a border for the Super Game. Maybe I'm wrong. But I want to say it came with like a border when you put it in and had like a cool little thing around the outside. I would play it so much on my Super Game Boy. That thing was so, like, the Game Boy player on the GameCube, also a superb little item. But that followed the Super Game Boy. And that thing was like a giant Super Nintendo cartridge. It was lock-on technology. Giant Super Nintendo cartridge with a slot on the top that you put your Game Boy game into. And now all these shitty-looking puke green games were on your giant 27-inch box tube TV. And they just looked awful, and it was incredible at the same time. So many good times with the Super Game Boy. I don't know if we'll ever do Remember the Game about it, because I feel like I just said everything there is to be said about it. I feel like that was your Remember that. I could cut that out and release it as a Remember the Game someday. But good times with the Super Game Boy. And of course, so you had these great peripherals. You had all these incredible games. Everybody loved the Super Nintendo, except Sega Genesis kids. We were part of the best console war in the history of console. I'll argue the best war in the history of wars. Definitely the best console war in the history of console wars. Nintendo versus Sega. It's not like today where you fucking PlayStation and Xbox kids get on your fucking tick tubes and call each other slurs and hateful things and wish horrible fates on their mothers and their families because they play on different systems. Back in our day, it was like Genesis does what Nintendo don't, and Nintendo would be like, "Hey, our games you playing with superpower and all that." Like they had commercials going after each other, but we as the gamers were just like, "I would like to try those other games." I hardly knew anyone that owned a Sega Genesis. I felt like everyone I knew had a Super Nintendo. I knew one kid that had a Sega Genesis. Two. One in Calgary and one in Cold Lake. And then I would play at the dentist in Cold Lake. But I didn't know anyone else that had a Sega Genesis. But I always wanted to. It just felt like it felt like you were doing something kind of wrong. A little dirty. Playing the other guy's system. But it was so... it was like... I felt like I was cheating on my games. But it was always worth it. It was so good. Old Man Gamer said, I never owned a Super Nintendo and I've always regretted it. My parents bought me a Mega Drive because I'm from the city of Great Britain. My neighbor had a Super Nintendo and games like Mario Kart, Street Fighter 2, and others that made me so jealous. The Genesis, as it was called for you, was great, but the Super Nintendo was just more mythical in the UK as there were far less of them. I still need to get one. Is that? I didn't know that. So the Genesis was the... It's like a weird alternate universe where the Genesis was the predominant system in the UK? Wow. Oh, the Mega Drive. It's a stupid name. Sorry, but that's wild. The Big Deal said, as a Genesis kid, I wouldn't trade my gaming experience growing up for anything. But I do wonder how different my life would be, and my dad bought me a Super Nintendo for Christmas instead of a Genesis. I only got to experience a small portion of the Super Nintendo library at friends' houses or in-store demos, and I'm still discovering new games on it as an adult. But I can really appreciate the Super Nintendo, and its game library is one of the greatest of all times. You know what? I think people that grew up in the Super Nintendo, Sega, Genesis console wars... We're the same kids that grew up during the Monday Night Wars in pro wrestling. We had two companies just doing everything they could to try to get your attention and your money, and we were the winners. This is why This is why I keep hammering we need Xbox to not suck and be competitive and push PlayStation, because we were all winning back then. Oh, it was a magical time. Oh my God. Beaver Rescue falls short. Says, I've noticed there's been sort of a revisionist view of the 16-bit console's graphical capabilities to the point that nowadays many people seem to praise the Genesis over the Super Nintendo. Make no mistake about it. Not only have Super Nintendo games aged better, but they were absolutely also considered better looking at the time. There is nothing on the Genesis that can rival any of the Donkey Kong Country games, Yoshi's Island, Super Mario RPG, or any of the Square RPGs. And I don't even give a shit about graphics. Now, I'm going to disagree with you on that as a Super Nintendo kid, Beaver Rescue. But before I do, Mateo replied to that comment and said, I don't fully agree with this. At the time, the Genesis version of the same port was almost always considered the better version graphically. I think that's where the being better comes from on a like-for-like basis. I will say that I remember that too, like in magazines, they always said like, oh, when the sports games were on both systems, the Genesis one was better. They had blood in their fighting games and the Super Nintendo didn't. I can't even tell you the number of people that have written in and told me I should have played the Genesis version of Aladdin or the Genesis version of Jurassic Park and how they're better. So, listen, I'm biased because I grew up with the Super Nintendo. I have really grown to love and respect the Sega Genesis. Many of you know that. I do think pound for pound the Super Nintendo library is better and has aged better than the Sega Genesis is. And I don't know if I'd agree that there's not a Genesis game that looks as good as Donkey Kong Country, Yoshi's Island, or Mario RPG. I've always thought Sonic is gorgeous. And playing Streets of Rage 2, I think that game is fucking sexy as shit. I will say, hot take, I'll never understand how Phantasy Star matches up against Final Fantasy. That's just me. I'll never get that. But I do think there are some games on the Sega Genesis that look as good as the Super Nintendo. What I think is happening is a lot of kids... or a lot of people that grew up on one side of the console wars in the 90s, like myself with the Super Nintendo, have grown to appreciate the other side, have been like, we really did have two incredible systems back then. And that's not me trying to fence it. Y'all know I'm a ride or die Super Nintendo guy. But I really have grown to appreciate what the Sega Genesis did. We were just, man, what a magical time. What a magical time for games. And then it all started to end in 1996 when the Nintendo 64 was released. And I remember in the hype building up, at one point it was called the Ultra 64, I think. I remember reading, because at that point I was spending a lot of my money on gaming magazines. And I remember thinking that the Nintendo 64 looked fucking insane. It was wild. And my brother and I got one for our birthday, because our birthdays are very close. So sometimes instead of getting individual gifts, we would get one big gift. And I remember we got a Super Nintendo the year it came out. We got the new one. A Nintendo 64 the year it came out. And we had Mario 64 and we had Mario Kart 64 shortly afterwards. And I would play it, but I would always go back to the Super Nintendo. And I feel like there was harmony in our household for the first time because my brother wanted to play the 64 and I was like, good, I would rather play the SNES. And you all know I'm still like that today. I prefer my games 2D over 3D. Doesn't matter if it's Mario or Zelda or Sonic or RPGs or whatever the fuck. I'm always going to prefer 2D gameplay to 3D gameplay. I don't know what, I guess it's just I was so attached to the Super Nintendo. And like, make no mistake, Mario 64 is a great game. Ocarina of Time, it's fine. It's good. I'm always going to like Link to the Past better, but I get it. It's great. You know what started to hook me with the 64? The two things that got me and finally made me start slowly moving on from the Super Nintendo. One was multiplayer and the fact that we could play the 64 4 players instead of 2. That was a big fucking deal because we never had a multi-tap. And then it was the multiplayer games. It was GoldenEye, it was Mario Kart 64, and it was the wrestling games. I will say one exception to where I say I prefer 2D to 3D is wrestling. We used to play WWF Royal Rumble on the Super Nintendo like crazy, and it was fine, but my fuck. When WWF Warzone came out, I was like, fuck Royal Rumble. I'm playing this. This is insane. GoldenEye was a game changer. Mario Kart 64, 4 players, forget about it. But I fought it for a long time. If I was playing games with my friends, I wanted the 64. But if I was just at home by myself playing a video game, I was going back to the Super Nintendo. If the NES was like a brother to me when I was little, the Super Nintendo was like a childhood best friend. I love that system. I was playing it right up until the Xbox, PS2, GameCube era. It wasn't when I bought my own PS1. That was the first system I bought with my own money. When I bought a PS1 and I started buying sports games and I started playing like Final Fantasy VII, Tony Hawk Pro Skater, Metal Gear Solid, believe it or not, that was when the first time I really started to drift away from my Super Nintendo. But I still played it for years. It's almost fucked up. I know a lot of you will understand, but it's almost fucked, the connection I have to the Super Nintendo. It's the inanimate carbon rod. Like it's just like, I know it doesn't love me back, but I just have such an emotional attachment to that video game system. And I don't know if it'll ever go away. It's a first love. It'll never go away. Ida Hoju said what I wouldn't give to get my SNES and my small collection of games back. I'm pretty sure my mom must have donated them to Goodwill when I was in high school and too busy with my PlayStation or my teenager stuff to notice. Hopefully it found its way to some lucky kid and made his childhood like it did mine. Yeah, so this is what happened to our Super Nintendo. When I moved out of my parents' house for the first time, I had my own Super Nintendo. I had bought one, and my brother and I split up the games, and he wasn't really playing the Nintendo back then. He was playing like the Nintendo 64. Actually, he was big into like the PS1, PS2. So he didn't really care. So when we split them up, I took all our heavy hitters. I had Earthbound, Super Mario World, Yoshi's Island, Donkey Kong Country 3, Link to the Past. I had all of our best games. He didn't really care. And then at some point, probably around my 30th birthday, I sold them. I sold my entire game collection. I was a game collector then. And I sold everything. And I don't remember what I did with the money. I think Shaylee and I took a trip. But I regret it to this day. And that's whenever, anytime someone writes into the show, it says, should I sell my games? I'm like, if you need the money to pay rent or put food on the table, yes, sell your stupid fucking games. But if it's just they're just taking up space, don't sell them. Because you'll never be able to get them back for the money you're selling them for. And you'll probably never be able to get your own childhood copies back. And it's not the same. Like my brother held on to our childhood NES and Super Nintendo all these years, and then he gave them to me a couple years ago. That's what I'm looking at on my shelf right now, is my original NES and Super Nintendo from when I was a kid. And I don't have all the games. I've had to slowly rebuild my collection because I took most of the good ones and sold them like an asshole. But the fact that I still have my childhood systems makes me so happy. So I'm telling you, do not sell your consoles. If you don't have to, do not sell them. You will regret it. It also got me wondering, I looked up sales numbers. So worldwide, the Super Nintendo sold about 49 million units. The NES sold about 62 million. I wonder why the Super Nintendo didn't the Super Nintendo's the better system. I think almost everybody agrees. I don't know why it didn't outsell the NES. Was it parents being like, you already have a Nintendo? Maybe I think the Genesis probably ate into their sales a little bit because some kids went from Nintendo to Sega. And I just wonder if maybe it wasn't cool. Too Old for Hard Mode wrote in and said, I had an Atari in elementary school, an NES in middle school, and just as the Super Nintendo was coming out, a high school kid told us only losers played video games, and we all believed him. I spent the next few decades thinking the Super Nintendo was a lame system because I didn't know anyone who played it, and it didn't sell as well as the NES had. Remember, the game reintroduced me to the Super Nintendo and has shown me what I missed. Thanks for helping heal a bit of unresolved high school trauma for me. And I think that is part of it too, is I think when we were kids, speaking of people my age, like in elementary school, everybody had an NES. Like everybody wanted to play NES. Maybe by junior high and the Super Nintendo, maybe people were starting to check out a little bit. Like I still loved it, but maybe I don't know. Maybe it just wasn't cool to be a gamer at that point. Maybe it's considered like a childish thing. I don't know. I loved it. But I was a nerd, so I don't fucking know. I also, just in case you're wondering, I quickly looked up the best-selling Super Nintendo games in North America. And of the top 10, 9 of them were pack-ins. And it shows you how much gaming has grown. Super Mario World is the best-selling Super Nintendo game of all time, almost at a 2-to-1 clip over the number 2 game, as Super Mario World has sold 20 million copies. 20 million. Just to give you an idea, Super Mario Odyssey sales numbers. Super Mario Odyssey has sold 28 million copies as of this summer, to 20 million lifetime for Super Mario World on the Super Nintendo. Like, it's just, gaming has gotten so much bigger. Super Mario World, best-selling game on the SNES. And again, 9 of these 10 were pack-ins. So their sales numbers are a little bit skewed because you might have bought a console, and I'm 90% sure, I may be wrong. Actually, am I wrong? Were they considered a sale? Yeah, it must be a sale if it was a pack-in. Super Mario World, 20 million. Mario All-Stars, 10 million. Donkey Kong Country, 9 million. Super Mario Kart, 8 million. Street Fighter 2, The World Warrior, 6 million. And that was a package, so that has to be how it got to that number. Donkey Kong Country 2 is 5 million. Link to the Past is 4.5. Yoshi's Island is 4. Street Fighter 2 Turbo is 4. It's the only game in the top 10 that wasn't packaged with an SNES. And that's why I said that World Warrior must have been a pack-in, because Street Fighter 2 Turbo is the one everybody talks about. And it sold 2 million less. And then Star Fox is number 10 at 4 million. So, man, that's a lineup of games, man. Holy fuck. And like those games there that we just listed off, those aren't including the smorgasbord of incredible Super Nintendo RPGs. That's not including Mortal Kombat, Killer Instinct, SimCity, F-Zero, Ninja Turtles, Super Metroid. Like, it's just, holy fuck. And I think, like, at the end of the day, a console is going to be judged on its games. And I think the Super Nintendo is considered the GOAT because its games still hold up so well. I genuinely believe it's the pinnacle, along with the Genesis. The 16-bit era is the pinnacle of 2D gaming. Because you can go back as far as like Pong, Pac-Man, Space Invaders. The 16-bit era is the peak, the end result of all those games leading up to that. And then gaming kind of started over when they went to the PS1 and Nintendo 64 with 3D gaming. And I think we're pretty much at the peak. I think we are in the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis era of 3D gaming now. Because graphics can only get so much better. I think next will be online, virtual reality, that kind of stuff. Like, I think we're getting close to the Super Nintendo Genesis era of modern 3D gaming. And which makes sense because they've been making these games since the mid 90s, right? And now it's been 30 years of these. Like, they should be getting pretty good at them by now. John C500 said, the Super Nintendo has the title for the most beautiful games ever. Pretty pixel art that even holds up today. I got mine in a bundle along with Super Mario World, Earthbound, Link to the Past, and The Lost Vikings. I later got Super Ghouls and Ghosts and Mega Man X to slowly build up my library. The hours I poured into these games is unmatched. So much fun with this machine. It sits toe-to-toe as my favorite system alongside the PS1. I agree with what you're saying about the graphics. And I'll loop the Genesis in there as well. But graphics from the 16-bit era are timeless. Most part. Like Star Fox, Super Mario Kart, there's a few exceptions that are a little bit rough on the eyes, but when they just stuck to 2D, those games, like, they'll never not be gorgeous. And I'm not saying a kid can't pick up an NES controller and play it today. I used to set my NES up at these expos, and kids can play Mario for the first time, and some of them actually pick it up pretty quickly and get pretty good at it. But I do think the Super Nintendo is a much more welcoming first experience. Those games will literally never not be good. They'll never not be playable. They will always stand the test of time. You go back and try to play some PS1 and Nintendo 64 games today, they can be pretty rough. You go back and try to play some NES games today, they can be pretty rough. But you go back and play a Super Nintendo or a Sega Genesis game, and a good Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis game will always be good. Everyone will always be able to figure out how to play it. It's just a golden era of games, man. Getting close to wrapping this up. A few more of your comments, and I I don't think I can swallow any more Super Nintendo gum. Like, I have really gone down on this thing. Ninja Kick the Damn Rabbit said, the Super Nintendo was, and will forever be my favorite console. Growing up, I had the NES first, then I got my 64. I didn't know about the Super Nintendo until much later. My stepbrother had one with two of my all-time favorite games, Mario World and Super Metroid. And the moment I popped in Super Metroid was the moment my 64 started to collect dust. My dad had a Genesis, but the Super Nintendo kicked its ass. I discovered so many great games and franchises from my time playing it. My favorites of all time are on the Super Nintendo. Mario World, Metroid, both the Final Fantasies, and baby's first RPG, Mystic Quest, Turtles in Time, Donkey Kong Country, the list goes on forever. Nothing can beat this console. I still find myself going back to it and its game library while I've got a PS5 and a Series X sitting there staring at me. Because they'll always be good. Like, those games will, every game you just listed there, except maybe Mystic Quest. I haven't played that one, so I can't speak to whether or not it's good. But everything else you just listed there will always be good. Cal C said, I absolutely love the Super Nintendo. The controller was perfectly designed in a way that made any game of the time a pleasure to play. I have many fond memories of playing Turtles at Time and then switching to Mega Man. Sucks to say it, but you just don't get that feeling anymore. That hit home with me, Cal, because you're right. Like, I'm really enjoying Silent Hill 2 Remake right now, but I can't think of a game. The only game from this generation that I think I get the same feeling I got playing Super Nintendo is Mario Odyssey. That's the only one I can think of that just takes me back to that. Maybe Mario Kart 8, maybe. I don't know what it is. There's just something. It's just like the old movies. Like, I've been watching these old movies, and I say it every time I do a mini movie review on The Rambling Idiot. I'm like, something about these old movies, maybe it's because they couldn't rely on fancy graphics or fancy CGI, but they just hit different. They just hit different. Maybe it's the real sugar. I don't know. Maverick said SNE motherfucking S. I was like, what the fuck? How am I supposed to read that? God, what a system. I was born the same year as the Nintendo, but this was the system that I was old enough to create my memories with. Picking games at Blockbuster, playing games only my friends had, bullshitting about the games we were playing on the playground, and now I've discovered many games I never knew of before and replayed ones I've only tried, and man, the graphics, gameplay, stories are so timeless. 30 years later, and I enjoy them the same, if not more, than when I was a kid. I finally did a full playthrough of Link to the Past, and it was like playing a brand new game. I just listened to the Mario Paint episode, and what a nostalgic kick in the teeth. Earthbound is on my backlog. I love this system. I can't say enough. And thank you to everyone that wrote in. There was like 80 comments, basically all just saying that kind of stuff. These are my favorite games. I loved it growing up. I could have just sat here and read these comments all day, and it just warmed my... I hope you all enjoyed this as much as I did doing it, because this was so much fun. I still go back and play my Super Nintendo all the time. If you come by my Twitch streams, my favorite things to stream are NES and Super Nintendo games. When I'm having a bad day, I'll fire up Super Mario World, which I play through at least 2 times a year. I'll fire Mega Man X, Link to the Past, Super Punch-Out, and I'll just play them and just relax. They're relaxing to me. Oh my God, man. And the Rockstar, final word, said the Super Nintendo came late for me growing up with a single parent. In 93, when I got it, it felt new to me, as not many of my friends had one. I remember the days of The Empire Strikes Back, Super Mario World, and Donkey Kong Country. The consoles before were hand-me-downs, so the Super Nintendo was so special to me. Before this podcast, I hadn't even heard of Mega Man or Earthbound, but I would have loved to have played them like others here. I gotta say 2 things. One, I love when people write in and tell me they discovered a new retro game because of this show. Never stop sending me those messages. That will never not tickle my pickle to hear that, like, oh my God, I never played Earthbound, and then your show made me fall in love with it. Like, that kind of thing makes me so happy. And one thing that I love is that I'm still discovering, there's not a console out there that I know the library of better than the Super Nintendo. And I'm still discovering new games on it that I love, right? Since the show started, Super Star Wars, Super Ghouls and Ghosts. I didn't appreciate Super Metroid until I got older. NBA Jam. There's still more games on it that I want to play. I will never get tired of the Super Nintendo. I adore this system so much. And this is one of those episodes where I truly think that, like, my passion for video games come through on every episode of the podcast that I do, but I at least I hope they do. But I really hope my passion for this system came out on this episode, because it is so baked into my DNA. I love the Super Nintendo. Maybe it slots in only behind Shaylee and Molly. I can't think of much else that I love more than the Super Nintendo. Although the Switch is pretty fucking special. So that'll do it. I like doing these retrospectives. If there's a system out there we haven't done one on yet that you want one, we will probably do them eventually. I love doing these episodes. That was that hour just flew by. Fucking flew by. Holy Jesus. I'm going to get out of here. My dog wants a walk. And now I'm kind of jonesing to play some Super Nintendo. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. I appreciate you. Next week, we're going to do the Patreon poll topic. So I'll get that thread up before the weekend so you can start nominating ideas. And then for the Halloween episode of Expansion Pass, I'll hit you with my Silent Hill 2 remake review. All right? Take it easy, everybody. Cheers. Go play some Super. Shut up. Here's the thing.